Good morning, viewers. You're welcome to this new edition on sustainability and the mining sector. Uh, Yesterday, we talked about the first section, which is the sustainability and also the safety practice. Today, we shall be looking at the part two on sustainability in the mining industry, series one. Here I have with me Mr. Matthias, is the presenters for today's training. Mr. Matthias, you're welcome.
Thank you very much. Uh, Good morning, viewers, listeners. Today is the day two for uh, topic which is sustainability in the mining industry. Today, we'll be looking at sustainability and the mining sector. Clearly, we'll be looking at two main topics: mining risk and safety requirements in environmental management, and environmental and regulatory compliance in Nigeria. Our training yesterday talked deeply into what mining is all about and the various safety methods that are involved in mining. Going straight into our training for today, we'll be looking straight first at the mining risk and safety requirements in environmental management. Now, the overall sequence of activities in modern mining is often compared to the 5 stages in the life of a mine. And these stages are prospecting, exploration, development, exploitation, and reclamation. Looking at these stages critically, the prospecting and exploration are the precursors to actual mining, and they are most times combined. Now, geologists and mining engineers are often responsible as they share responsibilities for these 2 stages. The geologists are more involved with the prospecting, while the mining engineers are more involved with exploration. Likewise, looking at the development and exploitation, which are also closely related. They are usually considered to constitute mining proper and are the main province of the mining engineers. Now, reclamation has been added to these stages to reflect the present times. Mostly it's looked at as closure and reclamation. Now, closure and reclamation of the mine sites has become a necessary part of today's mine life cycle because of the demands of the society for a cleaner environment and stricter laws regulating the abandonment of mines. Now, the overall process of developing a mine with the future uses of the land in mind is termed sustainable mining. As our main topic for this presentation says sustainability in the mining industry. Now, looking at the word sustainability. Now, as we said, that the overall process of developing a mine with future use of the land is termed sustainable mining. Now, we have to define the word sustainability. Now, taking the Brundtland Commission's definition, which defines sustainability as the ability of the current generation to meet their own needs without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs. Now, in a nutshell, it talks about conservation of mineral resources, because this has really become a very important issue in general public discussions today. Now, the society is becoming more conversant of the need to conserve energy, minerals, and the environment. Accordingly, the mining industry has endorsed the policy that favors extraction of minerals in a more sustainable manner. Now, these policies favors mining as long as the effect on the environment or the economic welfare are not are not a burden now on future generations. Now, before we continue further, there are three main overarching goals of sustainability as discussed in our presentation yesterday. And these are economic prosperity, environmental health, and social equity. So the three overarching goals of sustainability must be economic, environmental, and social. Now, going into our main topic for today, which talks about mining risk. Now, when we say risk can generally be said to be a situation involving exposure to dangers. Now, is the possibility or chance of loss or injury. Now, it can also be said to be a probability or threat of damage, injury, liability, loss, or any other negative occurrence that is caused by either external or internal vulnerabilities and that may be avoided through preemptive action. Now, we cannot talk about risk without talking about hazards. When we say hazards, hazards are a source or a situation with the potential for causing harm. And when we say harms in terms of human injury or ill health, and it's also a possibility of having a potential to damage to properties, damage to the environment, or a combination of all this. Now, looking at hazards at a workplace, it may include noisy machineries, maybe moving forklifts, chemical, electricity, walking up a ladder, noise, maybe bully at work or stress. Now, if these hazards have been identified, then risk now is the chance, either high or low, that any hazard will actually cause somebody harm. So there is a very close relationship between hazards and risk. If there is no hazard, then there is no risk. Now, risk in a nutshell can be said to be the likelihood of the unwanted events or the potential consequences of that same unwanted event. So this is the relationship between risk and hazard. Continuing in this discussion for today, we will be looking more at hazard. Now, categories for ranking the severity of hazards, which also boils down to categories and severity of risk. We have made for us some hazard categories, 4 hazard categories, having class 1, 2, 3, 4, and the effects of these categories on the system. And when we say system, on the entire operation mechanism. Now, the class 1, we tend to be negligible. And when you say the class 1, a hazard that is rated class 1, being negligible, it's simply saying loss of function that has no effect on the entire system. Now, for class 2, we tend it to be marginal. And when we say marginal, we mean it degrades the system to some extent, but does not cause the system to be unavailable. Now, going to the class 3, which we term critical. When we say the hazard is critical, this hazard will completely degrade the system. Now, affecting the system is what we mean by this. Going to class 4, we call it catastrophic. Now, this fault will produce severe consequence, either grinding the entire operation to a halt, causing devastations, Such hazards are maybe when we term death that must have occurred through some unwanted circumstances. Now, we're looking at types of hazard in mining. Now, with a recap from our yesterday's training, we're made to understand that we have two types of mining, and these are the surface mining and the underground mining. Uh, we were made to understand that the surface mining are typically used for more shallow and less valuable deposits, while the underground mines are a more expensive kind of mine and are often used to reach deeper deposits. Now, both are employed in entire mining processes. Now, depending on the occurrence of the ore or the mineral in question. So, looking at these two types of mining, either surface mining or underground mining, we have various types of hazards, and these hazards that also portrayed in various kind of risk that are contained when you have these types of hazards, because having in mind that we are talking about the mining risk. Now, we have highlighted a few of these hazards in here, having one talking about ventilation or dust exposure. Ventilation had to do more with the underground mining, while your dust exposure has to do mostly with surface mining. And when we say ventilation, that's mining ventilation, it's more of a significant safety concern for many miners. Now, because looking at poor ventilation in a subsurface mine causes exposure to harmful gases, heat, and dust, which can cause illness, injury, and as much as death. Now, gases in mines can poison the workers or displace the oxygen in the mine, especially in underground mines, causing what is known as asphyxiation. That's a state or process of being deprived of oxygen, which can result in unconsciousness or death, or more like you say, suffocation. Now, the dust now, taking a clue, an example of the coal mining, where the extraction, the crushing, and transportation of coal can generate a significant amount of airborne respirable coal dust. That's extremely fine. Looking at dust less than 10 microns in size, which cannot be seen with the eyes. Also, looking outside in non-coal mining, maybe like a quarry, you have stones and sands and gravel mining. Now, these operations and can also generate dust that are inhaled. And like we said, there are dust that are less than 10 microns in size, which cannot be seen, and when inhaled, causes serious problems. Now, the second type of hazard we're going to look at today is gas ignition. And when we talk about gas ignition, we're looking at, for example, having ignited methane gas, which is a common source of explosion in coal mines. Now, this in turn can initiate more extensive coal dust explosion. Now, rock dust, especially like limestone, can spread through coal mines to diminish the chance of coal dust. Now, coal dust explosion, which is an example we're trying to use, can begin independently of methane gas explosion. Now, where we have frictional heat and sparks generated by mining equipment, this can ignite both methane gas and coal dust. So that is one of the hazards we're looking at. Now, the other one we're looking at is noise. Now, all mines are noisy places. All mines are noisy places with constant drilling and heavy machineries at work. And the potential for hearing damage is quite serious. Miners basically utilizes equipment strong enough to break through extremely hard layers of the Earth's crust. And these equipment that are being used, combined with closed workspace, like for those in the underground, can cause hearing loss. Now, it can be easy for you to mentally get used to loud noises. But that doesn't mean that damage isn't still being done. Now, many people don't notice the damage to their hearing until long after they were first exposed to noisy environments, because mostly this damage occurs very slowly. And according to Clark, he said overexposure to excessive noise can result in tinnitus, that's ringing in the ears, sleep disturbances, concentration problem, and even permanent hearing loss. We're looking at the third body vibration, at times called WBV, that's whole body vibration, which is more like a slow forming physical hazard that occurs in mining workers, another occupation that work with heavy machineries. Now, in the mining environment, whole body vibration, termed WBV, can be caused either by spending a lot of time sitting on a machinery, which is most of the time in mining extractions, or by standing, such as walking on maybe jumble operators. Now, some form of vibrations are okay, but they become dangerous when they involve uneven surfaces. Now, symptoms of WBV include musculoskeletal disorder, reproductive damages in female, vision impairment, at times digestive problem, and at times cardiovascular changes. Looking at the next cavings, cavings are what basically we have mostly cavings and rockfalls. These occur both in underground and surface mining. Since mining entails removing of dirt and rock from natural location, uh, this causes it create large empty piles, rooms, and tunnels that allows caving or rock falls to occur. We have exposure to ultraviolet radiation. Uh, Looking at open pit miners undergoing the risk of UV radiation, it's in sunlight. It's something that is common. Now, overexposure of ultraviolet rays can put a miner at risk of skin cancer. Now, not only can UV rays cause this form of melanomas, skin cancer to form, but they can cause serious damages to the eyes if wearing of proper PPEs, especially protective eyeglasses, are not carried out. Now, in the short term, overexposure to sun can cause dehydration, headache, and nausea, especially working in open surface mine, maybe open mine pits. Now, mine workers often spend whole days out in the baking hot sun and are naturally at a very high risk of developing skin cancer and eye problems if adequate protective measures are not taken. We have the thermal stress, which is as a result of exposure to heat. We also have the chemical hazards, which are as a result of exposure to chemicals that are being used for carrying out the mining activities. Also, we have use of explosive. Now, explosive are used in mines for constructive purposes, especially you want to bring down boulders and maybe in the quarry industry, explosives are being used. But these can be hazardous if proper safety measures are not taken. Now, for example, you have fly rocks can be ejected beyond the blast site, causing personal injuries and damage to properties. Now, this really occurs. Now, we also have the abandoned mines. The reason why during our stages, 5 stages of, as earlier discussed, the reclamation has really come in, closure and reclamation, so as to curtail this issue of abandoned mines. Now, abandoned mines are very dangerous to anyone who attempts to explore such region without proper knowledge of such a region. Now, what are these safety requirements in environmental management as relating to mines or mining industry? Now, we've highlighted a few here, talking about managing the environment. where we actually had to make do with the policies that manages and governs the environment, especially using the plan, do, check, and act, where once your policies, your laws or regulations are created, you have to they are planned and designed, then they are um, implemented, as they do, and proper check are being done to see if this implementation are properly carried out. And where there are faults or lapses, you act as you find how to ensure that this is corrected and the proper measures are put in place to ensure it properly works. That's the acts part. Now, it's a continuous circle, which many at times is called the environmental management system circle. So it's more like you say the EMS circle of continuous improvement, where you define your EMS, you secure management's commitments, you set out your implementation team, you conduct reviews, you ensure these are properly effected, implemented, and you have your monitoring and especially you have a communication a process so as to ensure that these policies are fully implemented. Now, the second is managing the risk, where appropriate steps are being taken to minimize risk. And this risk, these steps involves many things, looking at well-conceived and implemented workplace safety and health programs. This is more like you going to that circle now, which is the do's part of the circle. Routine and thorough inspection and safety audits, which helps you to like check. Now, having effective engineering, administrative, and work practice controls, having frequent and effective employee training. This also help to manage risk. And most importantly, appropriate PPEs, which protects staff or workers from hazards when controls are not enough. So this help in managing the risk. You also have a situation where you have routine workplace maintenance. Like for some of the examples we looked at, the ventilation issues, we take, for instance, the U.S. Mine Safety and Health Administration that has required that groups of miners in the United States must carry gas detection equipment that can detect common gases such as CO, your O2, your hydrogen sulfide, and your methane, as well as calculate the percentage lower explosive limit. Now, this regulation, as effected in the US, clearly states or requires that all production stops if there is a concentration of as low as 1.4% of flammable gas present in such mines. Now, for noise, part of the risk management strategies is avoiding and reducing exposures, which can be achieved by applying engineering control at the noise source or along the noise path. Now, looking at the whole body vibration, which was an example of one of the hazards we look at, trying to work on this, managing this, it's reducing exposure, uh, which also reduces the health risk. And many a times, you can also, this risk, though cannot be avoided, but it's imperative that supervisors reduce the time for which employees use on the machines each day. Now, the next we're looking at is the health and safety management. The health of workers is very paramount. It's imperative that a database of workers is gotten, especially when bringing them in at the onset, so as to monitor the health status of every employee. Now, it's also very important that you have to also monitor the drug use, alcohol usage of the staff. Now, regular training schedule on health and safety procedures are very important. Now, these are important and there are steps that must be included in this environmental management plans. There are requirements that must be included in the environmental management plan. Looking also at equipment management. Equipment that is not properly maintained is an immense threat to the safety of workers and mining operation. Now, you can use the equipment management application to establish and create an inventory of equipment that will track maintenance schedules and ensure they are followed, required calibration and repair carried out, and any non-conformance immediately attended to. Now, this is very, very important. Now, we also look at hazard communication, where employees are informed about hazard, identifying every hazard in every work area and every job, and make sure all employees who are exposed to such hazard are well informed. Specifically, when you say well informed, we have for them to understand what the hazards are, how dangerous they are, and how to protect against them, and then what to do in the event of an exposure to such to particular hazards. Then the training actually is one of the most powerful accident prevention tools. Now, if you get to teach this information, the skills, the techniques, and procedures employees needs to know to be safe and healthy. Now, train frequently to keep workers up to date on workplace and regulatory changes and to keep them aware, alert, and prepared to work safely. Now, lastly, we're looking at monitoring. Monitoring also, when we talk about monitoring, that's more like helping give feedback because this will help us manage and ensure compliance, managing and ensuring compliance because ensuring that compliance with safety and health standards is very, very paramount. Complying with every detail, with every standard that applies to the operation and the workplace helps to make work very good. Now, any compliance complaints should be treated very, very importantly because this will help us check and effect accurate changes to the entire system. These are, and a lot more, are some of the safety requirements that are needed in the environmental management of within the mining industry, because this will help us manage and have a safe work environment and also reduce risk. Now, we will be going to the second part of our training today, which talks about environmental and regulatory compliance in mining. Now, like earlier said, mining is the extraction of minerals and other geological materials of economic value from deposits within the earth crust. We know mining adversely affects the environment by inducing loss of biodiversity, soil erosion, and contamination of surface groundwater and most even the soil. Leakages too of chemicals from mining sites can also have detrimental effects on the health of the population living within or around mining sites. Now, in some countries, mining companies are expected to adhere to rehabilitation and environmental codes to ensure that the area mined is eventually transformed back into its original state. And this takes us to our first topic we talked about, and the last part of the 5 stages of mining, which talks about reclamation, that's closure and reclamation. Countries are employing, ensuring that this part is included in the stages. Now, we're looking at environmental and regulatory compliance. Now, when we say environmental compliance, compliance actually means conforming to laws. So, environmental compliance means conforming to environmental laws, regulations, standards, and other requirements, such as permits to operate. Now, taking a clue from Nigeria, we know Nigeria is richly endowed with a variety of solid minerals of various categories. ranging from precious metals to various stones and industrial minerals. Now, much of these resources are being said to be have been said to they are not being fully exploited. But in a nutshell, one of the objectives of the country, Nigeria, now, as regards mining, is the new national policy on solid mineral. And this policy actually ensures the orderly development of the mineral resources of a country. Nigeria, as we said, ensuring that the orderly development of these mineral resources in the country, you have to ensure that the needed regulations, environmental regulations, are strictly adhered to. In Nigeria, as we said, there are a couple of policies, a couple of regulations, laws that are bound in the country. We have in our slide here, first, the country's constitution, which is the 1999 constitution being presently reviewed. We also have in Nigeria the national policy on the environment, which clearly is also being looked at to encompass all aspects of the environment. We also have the Federal Ministry of Environment Regulation. This actually comes into being because for all mining activities to take place, the Ministry of Environment has to be called in, and they have steps to take before these operations commences. Actually, we also look at the the Environmental Impact Assessment Act, CAP E12, Laws of the Federal Republic of Nigeria 2004. This is one very critical act that every mining company, especially in Nigeria, must adhere to after the screening of such projects. We also have the National Environmental Standard and Regulation Enforcement Agencies Establishment Act. That's the NESTRA Act 2007. It's a very, very important regulation that is also looked at. We have the National Environmental Regulations 2009. Now, we also have the Nigerian Minerals and Mining Act 2007 and the Nigerian Minerals and Mining Regulations 2011. We will having a little look at these two acts, this act and the regulation, which involves directly the Nigerian Mineral and Mining. We also have the National Minerals and Metal Policy. Now, these are the national policies. Now, in conforming to regulations, we have a lot of them. We have a lot of them because in complying now with regulatory acts, you have to comply to the national and international guidelines, rules, and regulations. We also have in Nigeria the Explosive Act because all mining, depending on the volume, had to do more with explosives. Now there is an act that governs that. The Labor Act, you need workers. Workers work in these mining sites. The Labor Act of the Laws of the Federal Republic of Nigeria 1990 governs that. We also have the Employee Compensation Act, and we have the Companies and Allied Matters Act 2004. Basically, before you commence operation, you need to register with the country. The Companies and Allied Matters Act takes care of that. National Health Endangered Species Act, then international guidelines and conventions. When we talk about international guidelines and conventions, we're having a couple of them. International guidelines like the Rio Declaration on Environment and Development, 1992, the Convention on Biodiversity, Biological Diversity, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and the African Convention on Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources. Now, international best practice standards and guidelines, like we have in the 10 principles, which are of the Equator principles, which are about 10 principles in number. We have the World Bank ESF, which is more like the environmental and social safeguard policies. We also have the IFC performance standard, eight standards, eight performance standard, which must be looked at also. Now, like we said, we will be looking critically into two of these national acts, which are the Nigerian Mineral and Mining Act 2007. Now, this act was passed into law on March 16, 2007, to repeal the Minerals and Mining Act number 34 of 1999 for the purpose of regulating the exploration and exploitation of solid minerals in Nigeria. Now, the act is made up of 6 chapters. The chapter 1, which talks more of mineral prospecting, mining and quarrying. This chapter 1 also have a couple of parts. It has parts that have to do with more of ownership and control of minerals, the mining incentives, mineral exploration, mining, quarry, talks about construction and quarry into mining accidents and the likes. The chapter 2 of this act talks more of small-scale mining. This is an area covered by especially small-scale mining lease and extension services. The chapter 3 talks about possession and purchase of minerals. The chapter 4 talks about environmental considerations and rights of host community. The 5th chapter talks about offenses and penalties, and the 6th chapter talks about the miscellaneous provisions. Now, this act, looking at them critically, each chapter, and interpreting them actually governs all aspects of mining, from prospecting to reclamation. Now, a violation of this act, there are offenses, penalties, and that are being made that follows offenses that are committed. Well, looking at the second part, which is the Nigerian Minerals and Mining Regulation 2011, these regulations are made in order to define the rules and processes in respect of matters provided under the Act. And when we say Act, we're talking about the Nigerian Mineral and Mining Act 2007. Now, this regulation gives you a breakdown, an analysis of how the various contents of the Act in 2007 are to be implemented. Now, these regulations actually defines the procedures and processes for the regulation of exploration and mining operations generally, including acquisition of the title to engage in such operation. So it spells out and governs all aspects of mining, like I said, from the inception. Now, it also prescribes measures that will protect and ensure the safety of workers engaged in mining operations, the general public, and the mining environment. Now, these regulations also regulate the processes and procedures for enforcement and compliance with the provisions of the Nigerian Mineral and Mining Act. These are just the two we've looked at as against the whole lots of regulations contained in the country. Now, in conclusion, strict compliance to all environmental laws, regulations, guidelines, standards, conventions, and adhering to best mining practices will enhance better and safe work environment, thereby reducing risk and optimizing economic and social gains of the mining industry. Thank you very much for listening, and we will be grateful if your questions can start coming in. Thank you.